Hello, everyone. Welcome to Community Bookstore's virtual event series. My name is Noah Mintz. I'm the store's event coordinator. Community Bookstore is celebrating over 50 years in business, and we credit the continued support of readers and writers for this milestone. So thank you all for spending the evening with us. I'm thrilled today to be collaborating with our friends and neighbors at Archipelago Books to welcome Armine Mortimer for a discussion of her translation of Christine Angot's novel, An Impossible Love, in conversation with Martha Cooley. Now, to some housekeeping before I introduce our guests. We've enabled Zoom's auto-transcribe setting. Actually, I'm about to enable Zoom's auto-transcribe setting. There we go. So if your version of Zoom is up to date, hit the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen to enable closed captions. There's also, if you have any questions for tonight's guests, please click on the Q&A button, which is also at the bottom of your screen, to submit them. We will be asking those at the end of the program, so please don't be shy. There's also a chat box through which I will be posting a link to buy tonight's book if you haven't already. And one caveat for tonight is that we're all at the mercy of our home internet connections, so please bear with any technical issues that could arise. We'll try to resolve them quickly. We have a great lineup of events planned for you this spring, so head over to our website, communitybookstore.net, and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date. One that I want to point out in particular is next Tuesday, April 26th. We're thrilled to welcome Jeremy Tiang for their translation of Rouge Street, a collection of novellas by Shuang Jue Tao, in conversation with Anton Her. That program is up on our website now and taking registrations. So now a little about the author and tonight's guests, and we'll get started. Christine Angot is one of the most controversial authors writing today in France. Since the 1999 publication of her novel Incest, Angot has remained at the center of public debate and has continued to push the boundaries of what society allows an author to express. Born in 1958 in Châteauroux, Angot studied law at the University of Reims and began writing at the age of 25. Her literary works have received prizes, including the Prix France Culture in 2005 for Les Désaxés and Une Partie du Cœur, the Prix Flore in 2006 for Rendez-vous, and the Prix Sade in 2012 for Une Semaine de Vacances, which she refused on the grounds that the theme of the prize did not correspond to the book that she had written. In 2015, she won the Prix Décembre for her novel Un amour impossible, An Impossible Love. Angot is now also a commentator on the television show On n'est pas couché. Armine Mortimer is the translation of Philippe Suller's Mysterious Mozart and his Casanova the Irresistible, as well as Yulia Kristeva's The Enchanted Clock. Excerpts from her translations of Suller's novels have appeared in 3 AM Magazine, Agni, the Brooklyn Rail, the Cossack Review, and Asymptote. Her long career as a professor of French literature occasioned many scholarly books and articles, as well as recognition by the French government with the Palme Académique in 2009. And Martha Cooley is the author of the national bestseller, The Archivist, 33 Swoons, and Guesswork, A Reckoning with Lost. The Archivist was a New York Times notable book and a new and noteworthy paperback. Cooley is currently a contributing editor at A Public Space. Her co-translations of Italian fiction and poetry include Antonio Tabucchi's story collection, Time Ages in a Hurry. A professor emerita of English at Adelphi University, Cooley now lives in Castiglione del Terziere in Italy. So now without any further ado, I will hand it off to you two. Armine, Martha, thank you both so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Noah.
Thank you, Noah. Thank you so much. And Armine, it's just a pleasure to be in this Zoom space with you and to be talking about a book that really wowed me, and I'm sure is going to do the same for all you out there who I welcome to this event with gratitude for showing up. I know Zoom takes a lot of our time and energy, so it's a pleasure to know that you were drawn to this, and I'm sure that Armine will illumine for us many facets of this mysterious and important book. So thanks to all, starting with the community bookstore. I lived for many years in Brooklyn, and the community is close to my heart, as is Archipelago, which published this book and many others. We might want to have a look at the cover, which is just gorgeous. And note that hand covering that mouth, because that will probably emerge in the course of our conversation, not that hand itself, but the notion of a covered mouth, as it were. So,
yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah. Armine, I'd love to start off our conversation by having you kind of put in context a bit who Christine Angot is and what she's written in the past. Now, she's written quite a number of books, but you might mention just a few that seem maybe germane to this conversation about this book.
Yes, in fact, yes, there's something like 22 novels starting in 1990, the first one she published. She was born in a small town, raised in a small town by a single mother, born in 1959, and lived there until about age 14 in a house that was not quite up to standard. Let's say, put it that way. In other words, she lived in a poor environment, and this is pertinent for the novel because the novel tells us about Christine's mother. You see that I've already plunged headfirst into the topic, which is the autobiographical nature of this book. In other words, when you read, say, a Wikipedia or whatever biography of the author, you recognize things that are in the books as well. So we'll get to that in a moment. As I said, she's written 22 novels. She's also written a lot of plays and 2 films. As Noah said, she's won several prizes for the novels. The most recent one received the second most important prize in French literature, which is the Médicis Prize. And it is actually very much related to the story that goes on in An Impossible Love as well. So I'll maybe talk about that a little bit later. But before she wrote An Impossible Love, Christine had published a novel called L'Inceste, incest rather.
Armine,
Yes.
I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. I've had a few people mentioning that they're having some trouble hearing. Perhaps your other earbud would help because it's the one with the mic on it.
Oh, the mic is closer, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for telling me that.
It's all right. No, we want to hear about the novel called Incest, which you were just about to mention. So
thank you for telling me this. I'm sorry that, yes, the novels that she's written since 1990, some of them were not very successful to begin with, but when she wrote Incest, she became a very famous person. That book immediately took off, and since then also. So she's a controversial sort of person. She can be very, very abrupt, very sorry, I've just been told that I'm too quiet. Okay. She can be very sort of, harsh with and brusque in conversations and directly attacks people in public spheres. So there's a degree of she has this aura of being a controversial sort of person. She was sued actually and lost for having included facts about a person, a real person, in one of her novels. And so this is the kind of thing that she is known for. She can be abrupt and so forth. But she's an excellent writer. I was really, really thrilled to be able to translate this book, and I would like to do some more of her books, especially the most recent one. In the novel Incest, just tell you quickly, when I read it, I thought this is going to be telling us all about incest. Well, not until the final few pages, or not final, but the last third, let's say. But what we did see before that was all the effect that the experience of incest she had undergone, the effect of that on her adult life. Mm-hmm. So she begins with a very troubled relationship with a woman, and also has a troubled relationship with a man in incest. And these are the result of her having been, I won't use the bad word, but messed up when she was 13 and so forth. So that's what incest does. We're tempted to say, she's telling her own story, and people have said that she writes what's called autofiction, which is telling one's life, one's autobiography, but using the tools of fiction. But she denies that. She doesn't like to use that word because she doesn't say that she's writing autobiography. You were asking me to talk about
Well,
autobiography as well.
what I find so interesting, first of all, thank you for giving us that sort of surround, especially the fact that she published a book called Incest, which pretty much pulls the reader's attention directly into something.
It's a surprise at the beginning. She's not telling about an incest.
And it's that I want to sort of underline here. There's a strategy of call it reticence, call it withholding, call it restraint, that is notable. I mean, it's obviously notable in the book you've just described, Incest, in which you would think, oh boy, if ever there was a sort of provocative title, that's it. And we're going to hear all about this. And it could be even sensationalistic or who knows what. That's the question that comes to the reader's mind. Who knows what? How is this author going to approach such a loaded topic? And the way you've described her restraint in that book, I also found in this book. It takes a long while before we get a revelation of what happened to the main character. And here's where I want to just sort of set the stage for our listeners here. This is a narrator named Christine Angot, the same name as the author. And so we have to start wondering, what is the relationship of Christine Angot to Christine Angot? And why name the character that? Could one write an essentially autobiographical novel with a character named, Sophie Blanc? Would it not be possible or desirable even to get that bit of detachment if that were the aim? Clearly, that's not the aim, though. This author is creating a kind of suspense, at least I thought so, in deliberately coming right at us with no difference but in name between author and protagonist. I defy you to start thinking about what differences may be or if they matter and why.
Well, that's the key question, I think, if they matter. She was, in a recent interview, let me see, she said that her books are not documents. They're not for the police. That's the expression she used, which suggests that she wants to be accurate, but at the same time retain her right to create the story, because she has dialogue, she has scenes that she's imagined in An Impossible Love. She is telling, to begin with, the story of the love between her mother and her father. Well, she wasn't even there, right? Yeah. So it's how does she report? She's not reporting their.
It's an act of enormous imaginative and emotional empathy, one could say. That the narrative strategy here is really interesting to me. And if there are writers out there in the audience, listen up, because this is a really interesting strategy. Obviously for readers, it's fascinating too. I'm not trying to say there's a big difference between how readers and writers might perceive this book, but I found as a writer myself thinking about, wow, what does it mean to first begin by so concealing the protagonist herself that we're really introduced only to the mother, to Rachel, and her life, her early years, her formation, and her meeting of Pierre, the man who becomes her lover and then the father of her child, who encourages her to have the child but doesn't want to be associated with the child in any legal or other emotional way. So we get all that before we learn anything about Christine Angot, the character's experience with the father. We don't learn about the incestuous relationship until well into this book. So the first relationship that's foregrounded is that of the parents themselves, which, as you've said, Armine, the child couldn't possibly know very much about unless the mother shared a little, but there's too much intimacy. It had to have been imagined. There's too much intimate detail.
Yeah, that's what she says. She says something like she wants to see the events of her life, or the people she is portraying, in this case her mother and her father, as if in a painting or a movie.
Yeah.
In other words, she's when she writes it, she can see it.
Yeah. And I think that's super interesting, because I think it's her way of engaging with material that is otherwise so kind of incendiary, that it requires her approaching it through a sort of in an aesthetic manner, to to think about narrative choices, about strategies for conveying the vividness of sensory details, of dialogue, of character, using the tools of a novelist. She's not making a police report. This is not, a police declaration. And so then it becomes all the more shocking when the penny drops for the reader, and it's like, wait, whoa, that happened. I mean, one could read the jacket copy, but I imagine some readers might just pick this up and say, okay, I'll just start reading and not really note how fascinating it is that this incendiary topic arrives partway through, and everything prior to that is so much about the relationship of mother and daughter, that impossible love.
Right. I'm glad you say that, because you ask yourself, what is the impossible love? Well, the answer is it's more than one. It's the impossible love between these two mismatched people. We should probably talk about the difference in social standing between Rachel, the mother, and Pierre, the father. So that's kind of an impossible love, but also the love between the mother and the daughter. In fact, I wanted at one point to consider possibly a title for the English translation that would include something about mother and mother's love, because in a way, that's almost more the subject of the book.
Yeah.
Almost more. I can't really say it is more, and then of course when one knows that there is incest in this novel, one would immediately assume that impossible love can refer to that. I mean, more impossible.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great perception, Armine, and really important to our sense of what's going on here. I think that our author had to start off talking about her parents and their meeting, but then stay quite a while with her mother's upbringing, to then get to the point where it would make emotional sense to introduce the fact of the incest, because that's a kind of fulcrum on which hinges the subsequent development of the impossible relationship with the mother, because the relationship is utterly transformed after that. And we'll get to that in a moment. I want to back off a bit, though, if you don't mind, and still stay with the beginning of the book, before the revelation, if you will. When the reader is treated to what I think of as a kind of series of mirrorings, which aren't just that between the author and the protagonist and their shared name, but there's a lot of similarities in the upbringings between mother and daughter, particularly being rejected and humiliated by their fathers. So, we're reading along, hearing a great deal about, the mother getting this job and having this family member do this and that, and all the while sort of wondering, why am I getting a lot of this backstory? And it all begins to make a great deal of sense as the novel proceeds, and one can see these mirrorings, these similarities. Both women also end up calling their children, Rachel calls Christine Fawn. Yeah. What is the word in French for that?
Biche.
Yeah, beautiful. And I found myself thinking, is there ever a more vulnerable animal than a fawn? To call your child fawn, it just summons vulnerability to me. And then they both, another way in which they're quite similar is sort of favoring repetition. When they talk to one another, they often sort of say things over and over. They state and restate. And it's as if they're afraid that what they're going to say won't be heard or believed or accepted or validated. And it's almost like a substitution for substantial communication. And the reader's beginning to sense, there must be things that can't be easily said here. Think of that hand over the mouth, There must be some sort of silencing going on in the form, ironically, of almost babbling. And there's a passage here that I think would be great for you to read, in which it absolutely alerts us to something that has happened with the father, but it also features that sort of urgent kind of spinning the wheels quality. You know which one I mean, Armine.
Yes, I do indeed. It's remarkable. She's 14. Christine is 14, maybe 13. has just returned by train from her visit with her father for a week, and she's saying it was difficult
Yeah.
visiting him. And then she says, "It did not go well, Mama." What happened? Did something particular happen? Well, for example, one day after lunch, we were going out for a spin. I was glad because since he was working, I would wait for him all day, and now we were going out. So I was happy. I was glad we were going to go out. He was in the hallway. I joined him. I went out into the hallway, and I shut the door. At that moment, he realized the key was inside. But I had shut the door. I thought he had taken the key since he was out in the hallway. There was no way I could know that it was still inside. And then, Mama, he began to accuse me, Mama. You cannot imagine the way he talked to me. He told me you don't close the door when you're not in your own home, that it wasn't done, that it was rude when you're not at someone else's house, that it was impolite, that I shouldn't have done that I wasn't at my own home. Do you realize, Mama? Do you realize how disgusting it was to say that to me? He talked to me like I was rotten fish. It was horrible. It lasted all afternoon. He kept shouting at me all afternoon. You cannot imagine, Mama. It was awful. It wasn't your fault, after all. You couldn't have known that he hadn't taken his keys. Right, but he kept saying it was my fault because... Don't cry, Christine. It's over. Tell me about it calmly. I went on. Well, he said that when you go out, when you are at someone else's house, well, you don't go out first, but second. After that, after the one who lives there. I said, yes, but you were in the hallway. He replied that had nothing to do with it. The fact that he was in the hallway changed nothing, that it was a matter of principle, that one doesn't close the door when one is not in one's own home. He said that, I don't know how many times, Mama, that it was a matter of politeness, of education, that I should have known that it's a rule and all that I should have gone out second after him because we were at his house and not shut the door as if it were my own home. So many times he said that to me. Do you realize how mean it was to say that to me, Mama? It was hard all the same to hear that for me. Yes, very hard. And how did all that end? Well, he called in a locksmith and it cost a lot. And he said it was my fault and the day was spoiled. And afterwards, was it better? Or was it like that all week? It wasn't very pleasant as weeks go, Mama. It was too long, maybe, don't you think? Yes, maybe. And also, he went to work while I stayed home all day and I was bored. Yes, it was too long. And even so, even also, it wasn't good. Something else happened. What? Well, tell me. Well, see, in the morning, he would leave early. I had my breakfast after he left, and then he returned at noon. One day at noon, he came back, and I had forgotten to put the milk bottle back in the refrigerator after my breakfast. When he saw that the milk was still on the table, you cannot imagine how he talked to me, Mama. Because of a bottle of milk you didn't put away? Yes, he talked to me like I was rotten fish, like he hated me, screaming. He said, don't you know that milk goes sour? And he shouted, you don't know that? How come you don't know that at your age? The tone of his voice, Mama, his tone, Mama. It was horrible, Mama. He said things, some things, horrible things, horrible. They were horrible things, Mama. Shouting, loud, 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 so loud. You don't know, you cannot even imagine. You cannot even imagine how loud he was screaming. Milk goes sour if you don't put it away at your age. You don't even know that. And I said, yes, I do know that, but I just forgot. I didn't think about it. I didn't do it on purpose. I'm sorry. I didn't notice. And he stopped crying like a little baby girl because I was crying. I can't take it, Mama. I can't take it anymore. It was a hard week. It was too hard. It really didn't go well. Really not. It didn't go well at all, at all, at all.
I mean, wow. That is just such an amazing instance of revelation in the form of withholding, an amazing strategy for alerting the reader to something is off here. That endless, you can't imagine, you don't know, you can't imagine. It was horrible, horrible, horrible. And we're talking about a key and a bottle of milk, okay? So clearly the disproportion is a signal, but we still are kind of perplexed and because we don't know yet. And when the revelation comes, and I'm not going to spoil it for the reader to say how it comes, but it's almost like en passant. I mean, it's like, wait, did I read that? What?
Yeah.
That we discover, okay, she's been, molested by her own father. And he's this profoundly disturbing figure. We get hints of his being disturbing right from the start. And yet the mother, the narrator, Christine, created by the author Christine, manages to convey the relationship in a way that makes it sort of transfixing and highly credible, and a sort of peculiar yet credible love story that then results in her conception and her birth and various things ensuing from that. And he's in and out of the story. So we're not really able to sort of understand how disturbed and disturbing a figure he is until we get the facts. He is described perfectly by her at the end of the book, but I'm going to hold off on that for a moment. What we do see, though, is that he's good at maintaining a kind of dominance. And dominance really matters to him socially, not so much politically. He's not interested in political dominance. He's interested in social dominance, in the quotidian realm, in the intimate realm, in which family members and the social circles count. And yet, here are things, I want to ask your reaction to this, Armine. These characters are very isolated. The mother and the daughter are isolated from one another in that they can't talk about what happened. They just have this conversation about milk bottles and being locked out in the hallway. Yeah. And Pierre has humiliated them to isolate them. But he himself is also isolated. He's incapable of intimacy of any kind, except for the kind that he and Rachel, the mother, intermittently convince themselves they're having. And he believes in his aloneness. He feels it allows him to stay alive and gives him power. And I find his solipsism very striking. There's a line here on page 7 at the bottom. This is Christine channeling this, right? We don't hear this from Rachel or Pierre, the parents. We hear it from Christine, the daughter, thinking back or imagining in what back in time her parents' relationship was like. And she says this about the father. He made a list of educated people who were imbeciles in spite of their high public positions. So she, Rachel, could profit from his experience. He shares the list with her. So Rachel could profit from his experience. He explained that you have to flatter them, the imbeciles, because to live free, you have to be alone and be the only one to know it. You have to live alone and be the only one to know it. That's a really strange locution. I mean, I don't know what that was like in the French. I love the way it's delivered in English. Yeah, I mean, the English is really striking. You have to live free. You have to live alone and be the only one to know it.
The only one to know that you are alone. That's
exactly
the strangest thing. But,
exactly.
And because there is information about his family and so forth. They're upper middle class, wealthy Parisian, highly educated, highly intellectual. His aloneness is partly an intellectual aloneness. He sets himself, as you say, he feels himself as, or he sets himself up as being dominant in his relationships by his superior mental qualities. That's how he thinks of himself. He sets himself above the common. Because he has all these qualities that he thinks are superior, and his philosophy about living alone, about and those early pages do go into great detail. It is interesting how the writer, Christine Angot, extrapolates from what she knows about her father when she was an adult, how he was behaving like this in the early days of his relationship with Rachel. I mean, it's one of the brilliant things about this book is the insight that the writer has and that she shows about her characters.
Absolutely. And that gets again to the earlier part of our conversation about how this is not a document and or a witness's report, but an act of the imagination. And even the moment of revelation when we learn, okay, there was incest and what kind of incest it was is given in just one word. And, we never hear anything about the sexual relationship from the character Christine.
That's true.
It seems almost like she's decided it's useless to do that the only thing that really matters going forward is Rachel.
Yes.
And how and why Rachel did not know what was happening.
And that is the big sequence of their life is told with she's a child, then she's a teenager, then she's a young adult, and during this time the relationship between Christine and her mother is one of great love. But when she turns roughly about the time of the incest, the daughter becomes very unkind to her mother, and there's a sort of a hatred going on. That's another impossible love in a way. And it isn't until they're both mature adults and they start to talk to each other a little bit, but still they're not talking. And the entire final scene between the mother and the daughter discusses why they didn't talk, and why they didn't see anything, why they didn't say anything. Again, the hand in front of the mouth, such a telling picture. And it's really, it's a brilliant thing. Now, you talked about the mirroring, and you reminded me of a sentence in which Rachel admits to her adult daughter that she was humiliated and she lost confidence. And the way she put it was, I was rejected by my father and I was rejected by your father.
Yeah.
It's interesting that she used the same word.
Yeah.
So her own father had basically ignored, Rachel's father had ignored her and her needs and gave her nothing, and was not present, came from time to time, and so forth and so on. So there was a kind of loss of male influence in that relationship as well.
Well, and I think Pierre was sort of sadistic enough, really, to pick up on that and to know that this was a woman the complexity of the relationship as it is drawn by the daughter is such that it's not that we don't believe that he was attracted to her, that he in some ways admired and respected her, but we know that what overcame all else in him was, and this is where his solipsism plays in, a sense that the only way he could sort of live free was to be alone and to use domination in whatever ways he could achieve it. And he knew that this was a way he could achieve it, by humiliating her right from the start, by denying that he was the father of the child, even though he had said, go ahead and have the child. It wasn't like he was saying, no, I don't want the child, which would be a way of saying it's mine, but I don't want this child. Instead, it was like, you do what you like, but I'm not having any part of it. And then, of course, the furthest humiliation of all, the most out there, is the humiliation, the ultimate humiliation via the incestuous relation with the daughter. And so he knows full well what he's doing. I also think it's important to notice a kind of mapping on top of the patriarchal stuff here, class. He's a wealthy man, or much wealthier than Rachel, who comes from very, very modest roots, and who has a kind of a hard scrabble life with getting jobs and losing jobs and needing new jobs. And we hear a lot about that. And she's Jewish. And so, that plays in. It's not a strong component of the story, but I think it's very masterfully woven in the moments when it appears as germane to, she can't be made to forget that. Let's just put it that way. And
she has no money. Her house is somewhat dilapidated. There is no bathroom. There's only heating in the kitchen, etc. It's so yes, and she doesn't have as much education. The father, Pierre, had many years of education, and Rachel had stopped after an early time and worked from the time she was 17. She worked as a secretary. So yes, there's a total disconnect between the two.
Do you want to say a little bit, because I'm conscious of time and I do want to open it pretty soon for question and answer, but I'd love to end, Armine, with you saying a little bit about that disquisition at the end on the sort of the logic that Pierre is employing, the logic of his thinking and behavior. It's remarkable, it's not right at the absolute end of the book, but it's very close to the end. And it just, I found myself so startled by it, and so in the best way, so taken aback by it. It had me thinking for days after.
It's brilliant. And it begins with Christine being able to say at last, how come you didn't say anything? Literally, how come you didn't see anything is what she says first. So to actually be able to bring up that topic, to actually not so much challenge her mother, because they're sitting in a cafe and they've been friendly for a while, and she's calling her mama again, after having refused to say that word for a long time. And so it's not a challenge, but it's just finally opening the door. How come you didn't see anything? And Rachel says, I'll never forgive myself for being so blind, basically. So at last there is going to be a conversation about this, but it's not, I don't want to spoil it. It's Christine, and here we have to think of Christine, the narrator, as also Christine, the author, I believe. There is brilliant writing here. And what I mean by that is the speaking that Christine, the narrator, does here is as if it is brilliantly written. So, and she understands what went on, the dynamic between her mother and her father, and the dynamic between her mother and herself, and also, of course, the dynamic between her father and herself. She understands it here and explains it slowly, logically. It's just a brilliant analysis that makes us admire the writing from start to finish. Honestly,
yeah, it is brilliant analytically, and when one hears brilliant analysis and thinks, okay, brilliant analysis, fiction, how does that work? And indeed, it feels right in tone. I think this is very much a tribute to your skills as a translator, Armine, that you've captured. You mentioned in a note to me, questions of register, that you wanted to capture the difference in tone and register between Pierre and Rachel, and wanting and to preserve. You also had to preserve. The repetition. One could, at first blush, think, shouldn't the translator have eliminated some of those is that really, but no. That kind of babble almost that these women undertake with one another. After you hear it a few times, as a reader, you're thinking there's got to be a reason why they are doing this. It says something, it's hand over mouth. It says something about what isn't working, that speech is silence in a weird way, or it's a silencing. You just sort of keep yakking. And
that's right, to fill the silence with empty words. So, towards the end, Rachel is saying, I'm going to read just a little bit here because it's really striking how the repetition functions. It's that, you see, how can I say it? I really would have liked to keep intact the memory of the good times I had with him. This is now very old Rachel saying this. We had some really good times. We spent some good times, the two of us. We had marvelous times, really. We had times, really, some beautiful times. And she mentions a trip they made, and then a little farther, I keep the memory of the very good times we had. We had some good times, some very good times. It's like, is it there? Was there a good time, or do I have to just keep saying it for it to be there? And other cases like this, there are many. In the dialogue. Dialogues of the mother and the daughter, and Rachel with, in general. There's a lot of repetition, and as you reminded me, I had to work to make her make Rachel sound different from Pierre, who speaks,
Right.
In a very learned, well, not learned, well, he was somewhat learned way. So,
He has a certain formality, I think, that one perceives a certain measured.
He corrects her grammar from time
Yes,
to time.
yes, that's wonderful too, as an indicator of character. He is superior, and we are not going to forget it. And certainly Rachel is not allowed to forget it. That he's.
And all this, we have to remember, is in the writing that the novelist Christine Angot imagines to tell this story and conveys it very well, I think. She said she wants to blur the relation to reality. It's it's, as we said earlier, it's not documentary. It's reality, but it's portrayed in a way that isn't. There is a sort of not clear distinction between what actually happened in her life and what she writes in these books. But they are true in that sense. They are true.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that sense of making uncertain the relation is mirrored in the uncertain relation between mother and daughter. That's part of the I think part of the impossibility we're talking about here is also that of communication. And this might be a good place to open up questions and also get to the because I see several questions are dealing with something I'm very happy to see them dealing with, which is your translation and the act of translating a book like this. I'll start with a question by Alison Westfall, who asks, were there particular problems with translating this book? For instance, the daughter says the visit was middling. Why did you choose this word and not so, or have her shrug? Just sort of, this is clearly an audience member thinking with their translator's hat on about, choices that could be made. And just problems in general or challenges you might have had.
Yeah. Right now, I don't remember what the word was in French. Maybe she said moyen, which is, sort of middle. I mean, it's, nothing good. There were some specific challenges, and one of them I was quite pleased at making a successful translation of when, at the moment that you've called the reveal, when Rachel finally learns what happened to her 13-year-old daughter, or had been happening, she comes down with an infection of her fallopian tubes. And the tubes in French are trompe. And the word tromper means to deceive, or se tromper means to be mistaken. And Christine Angot makes a pun out of that.
Oh, God.
So how was I going to translate that? Because we don't say trompe, we don't say make a mistake, anything to do with tubes. So I came up with your illusions went down the tubes, something like that. So that was the kind of thing. The colloquialisms are difficult to translate because we don't have the same kind of colloquialisms in English as there are in French. So and Rachel's speech is full of colloquialisms.
Yeah, great. Another translator, anonymous, asks, I'm wondering if you could talk a little about the age-old question of fidelity in translation, especially in the context of autofiction, or not. Do you feel a responsibility to be more literal in your translation because the text concerns the author's life, or do you feel liberated by Angot's insistence that the book is fiction, or does the question of genre have no bearing on your translation at all?
I can't say that it has no bearing, but I try to be very faithful. I do read the book very closely and know what it's saying. So then I work to find something in English that works and is still English. I'm constantly working at that. I'd say my first drafts, for instance, are maybe a little closer, and then I have to make some concessions to making things sound a little more comfortable in English. But I am not the kind of person who will, well, for instance, I didn't want to remove any of those repetitions, which would have been maybe something an editor, if this book had been originally written in English, an editor might have said, too much repetition, don't do that, and changed it and so forth and so on. But no, you have to do that. I think the fact that it's autofiction, or she refuses that term, but the fact that it tells about her life, I think it requires us to be just as faithful as any other time, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does seem to me that genre, in the end, needn't or shouldn't have much of an effect on the choices made. But the question of what to do with a book's own or a text's own idiosyncrasies, how to deliver an experience comparable to the experience that a French reader would have. I mean, that's as a translator.
That's the golden standard, the gold
Yeah.
standard. That's what I'm working towards. Yeah.
I've always found that the challenge translating. Like if I were to translate from English into another language, I'd have to think about the experience I have reading, and how does one deliver that? And then working in a foreign language, you're thinking, well, what effect did this text have on French readers? What can I imagine it had, and how do I make a comparable, an equivalent sensation? But then there's so much else to take into consideration, and this narrative is set in a certain time, so there'd be a certain lexicon that would be in use, certain slang, certain colloquialisms, certain phrasings that would be in use then that would be very different now. If this same exact story had happened 20 years later or 20 years earlier, the language would have to reflect that, I imagine. Yeah, great. One other question here. Let me go to Benjamin Dvorak says, thank you so much for this translation. I wonder what you consider to be the standard unit of measure for the translator, the word, the sentence, the paragraph?
I'm not sure what we're measuring. The unit of measure, I mean, certainly one always talks about the number of words in a book, in any book, or article, whatever. So perhaps that's the answer.
Perhaps it might have to do with, does one think in terms of sentence to sentence, or in terms of that's my understanding of the question, which maybe begs a larger issue of, for me, a fascinating question to ask as a translator and to ask other translators is, okay, you read the book through, but as you start translating, there may be an evolution in your awareness of either how the narrative is unfolding, or what's happening tonally or in register. And then you have to go back and sort of rework things to make for a kind of consistency or inconsistency, as the case may be, whatever's required. But
yeah, no, there's definitely going back and realizing that, maybe is a better way to do it has developed as you've worked on it. But there is, hard to return to the question, there is a degree to which the sentence is a unit that you have to resolve. Let's say you have to figure out how this sentence is going to stand in the final version, and then the next sentence and the next sentence and so forth. In this book, there are letters written by Pierre. So that's a certain style. There's the dialogue, many dialogues. And so those are other styles. And so you work on keeping all of those.
Yeah. Well, one thing I notice beginning translators often do, because it seems most loyal, if you will, but it lacks a certain necessary boldness, is they're trying too much to ape the syntax, to mimic the syntax of the original language, instead of thinking about how sentences might need a syntactical rearrangement or rethink. Yeah,
all the time. In French in particular, I imagine in Italian that you translate as well. It's I do find myself changing the syntax. The word order is definitely a different matter in just narrative. Narrative French, quite different from.
It's a thorny question because sometimes, however, the syntax is itself part of what is part of what is establishing tone or character or other, there are times in which in doing the Tabuki, my co-translator, my husband and I had to really think about the whole matter of a certain awkwardness that was there in the syntax.
And
That Italians don't usually arrange sentences that way, and we didn't want to come across as awkward translators, and
But
yet
you
there
kept
it
the
was.
awkwardness? Did you
Yeah.
keep the awkwardness? I think
We-
you need to. That's
We
the-
did whenever we could, and we had conversations with Jill about this. It was like, well, wait, this is weird. Yeah, it's weird in Italian. How do we not violate that? It's a tricky one. It's a tricky
I
one.
absolutely agree with that. In fact, I've had to argue it with various people, saying, well, this is not the normal way of speaking in French, or this is a word of a different register suddenly plunked into a sentence, and so I have to do something similar in English.
Yeah.
And this is the way to do a translation, I think.
Yeah. Well, really interesting to hear your insights on translating this book and on translating in general. And I'm just going to give one last quick check to the, I'm combining two questions, which I think you can answer quickly because we're nearly out of time. How did you choose to translate this book, and what are you working on next?
I translated this book because I met the translator of Incest, and she mentioned that Jill at Archipelago was looking for a translator for this book, and I said, oh, I really want to do it, and I did, and so there we are. And I was very, very thankful to Archipelago for taking this book on. I would like to do the next book, which won the Medici Prize. Let's see, is that working at all? No.
If you pull back a bit, maybe we'll see it. Yes, there you go.
So this is the one that won, published in 2021, and it tells everything you ever wanted to know about the incest.
Mm-hmm.
So
wow.
It's a book that should be published. It's, again, beautifully written and stunning. It's just a stunning book. So that would be the one I would like to do next.
Okay, great.
We all have something to look forward to after reading An Impossible Love and listening to this conversation. I think we're all hungry for more. So thank you so much for this conversation, both of you. Those of you at home, thank you for your thoughtful questions and for bearing with our tech issues. Please consider purchasing.
Sorry.
Don't worry about it. It happens. There will be a recording of this event online, so check in for that. Maybe it recorded the audio better. Please
or
consider
maybe you could cut out that section.
Yeah, I think I will. Please consider purchasing a copy of An Impossible Love from Community Bookstore. We hope to see you at another virtual event very soon. Thanks again for joining us, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Noah. Bye.
Thank you both.
Take care.
Bye.